By the time the calendar turned to 2022, the world no longer resembled the one left behind in 2019. South Africa, like many nations, had survived the initial storm of the pandemic, but survival came at a cost, not in body counts alone, but in the dismantling of memory, the digitization of humanity, and the quiet surrender of sovereignty. This was no longer about a virus. This was a new world being born, and South Africa was being rebuilt, not from rubble, but from control. The era of quiet tyranny. Lockdowns had faded, the soldiers returned to their barracks, but the systems remained. Every shop, every clinic, every border post now lived under the eye of a new regime, the regime of registration. ID numbers linked to vaccine databases, biometric scans required for bank accounts. New pilot programs discussed linking social grants to digital compliance. It was still voluntary, for now. But ask the pensioner in the Free State denied her SASSA payment because her records couldn't be verified. Ask the informal trader in Gauteng who couldn't access a loan without the correct QR-based credentials. Ask the rural mother in Limpopo who had to register her family with a foreign-funded NGO to receive food parcels. The world was not forcing submission, it was starving people into it. Meanwhile, the land question, South Africa's old scar, was reopened with surgical precision. In late 2021, momentum gathered behind land expropriation. By 2022, it was accelerating. The words were sharper, the tone was final. Expropriation without compensation, once a slogan, became a legislative weapon. It was no longer about redress, it was about redesign. Farms in Mpumalanga, the Free State, and the Western Cape began receiving quiet notifications. Letters, reclassifications, threats. A few made the news, others disappeared in the noise. But the fear spread. Not just through the white farming community, but through colored and black rural families too. Those who had bought land the hard way, who paid bonds, who didn't fit the narrative, they weren't spared either. Because this was never about race. This was about control of land, and more importantly, removal of ownership. The farmer who owns nothing cannot feed himself. He becomes a tenant, a renter, a subject of the state. While the land was taken from beneath their feet, the youth had something else taken: the past. In schools, history began to shift. Curriculum updates were rushed in through partnerships with global organizations. At first glance, they seemed progressive: decolonization, climate literacy, inclusive identity frameworks. But the reality was darker. By mid-2022, classrooms across the country were using learning materials written not in South Africa, but in London and Geneva. Designed not to teach critical thinking, but ideological fluency. Children no longer learned about the Voortrekkers or Zulu warrior kings. They learned about carbon footprints. They learned that tradition was dangerous, that family structures were optional, that citizenship was global. Behind these changes were old brotherhoods with new masks. The Broederbond had long since fragmented. Once the guardians of Afrikaner nationalism, their legacy now split in two. One half drifted into the global machine, ex-bankers, academics, politicians, now fluent in the language of sustainability, diversity, and stakeholder capitalism. The other half vanished into the heartland, building quiet alliances, funding schools, digging boreholes, printing old pamphlets on new printers. But it wasn't just them. The Freemasons, always discreet, had evolved too. No longer building churches and banks, they now built influence. Their handprints were visible in corporate boards, development banks, even judicial committees. And above them all, the Round Table, the ghost of Rhodes's dream, still breathing in elite universities, still guiding policy through think tanks, still convinced that South Africa must be reshaped in the image of empire, just without the name. These weren't conspiracies, they were structures, and 2022 was the year they began activating in full view. In the cities, protests erupted over fuel prices, electricity, water, wages. But deeper than the anger was a spiritual disconnection. It wasn't just that people were poor, it was that they felt forgotten, unanchored, redefined by foreign hands. In Johannesburg, a group of men looted a grocery store, not for food but for airtime, because data was now survival. In Cape Town, a pastor was arrested for holding an unauthorized worship gathering, while strip clubs and casinos remained open. In Durban, a mother refused to register her child for biometric ID. She disappeared 2 weeks later. The news said nothing, but her church wept. And yet, amid the despair, something began to stir. In the valleys of the Eastern Cape, an Isaac Sosa preacher reopened an abandoned mission school. No Wi-Fi, no grants, only the Bible, the plow, and the will to endure. In Pretoria, a group of young men met in a basement, not to start a party but a brotherhood. They read scripture, they learned old tactics, they trained, not for war but for remembrance. In the Platteland, old farms became places of refuge. Families pooled resources, they harvested quietly, they drilled water, they studied prophecy. And in one of these places, an old woman read from a dusty book. The words were Afrikaans, but the truth was eternal. The system will not come with fire but with favor, and many will say yes until the door closes. 2022 was not loud. It didn't bring explosions. It didn't bring revolution. It brought paperwork. It brought upgrades. It brought offers too good to refuse. But make no mistake, 2022 divided the people. It digitized their identities. And it dispossessed them of land, memory, and meaning. It was the year South Africa walked smiling into a cage, and few noticed, because the bars were gilded, and the door, never slammed, it simply clicked shut.